There we go. Tennessee with a convincing win, exactly what you would expect against UT Martin. 65-24 is your final. And Caleb, there was no real hangover after the just absolutely monumental Alabama win. And Tennessee took care of business. I really don't know how they couldn't have. This was a team that the Vols certainly had outmatched, and it wasn't even close from a talent standpoint.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't see this being close at all. I thought UT Martin would have a few tricks up their sleeve to make it interesting within the first like 7 to 10 minutes, particularly with the questions surrounding the Vols pass defense and how banged up they are and how UT Martin throws it well. And then I thought UT would blow it open in the second quarter. I think I was kind of right on that because UT Martin did score a touchdown on the second drive to tie it up. And they were driving on the third drive, but then came the interception by William Wright, and it was all Tennessee from that point.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a UT Martin team, be sure and like, subscribe, and share. We greatly appreciate that. If you're UT Martin, you're going to come out with your guns ablazing and do the best you can. But there's just a talent differential, and I did think that UT Martin came out high and ready to play. But in the end, these are just two teams on way two different levels. And credit the Vols for this because we have seen who can forget the Memphis game where the guy had his elbow down and Tennessee has come out flat before, and every team, every program has come
Right
out
after they
flat.
beat Alabama. Yep.
Yeah, right
Within
after
it.
they beat Alabama. But this football team just doesn't seem to be that type of team to have that psyche to show up flat. And I was thinking ahead to the Kentucky game, and you can read about that on Off the Hook Sports as well as Caleb's rapid reaction. This doesn't seem like a team that's going to stub its toe. Now, as soon as I say that, they'll trip up and lose to Vanderbilt. But I don't see this team having that sort of psyche to slip up and lose. Not to say they're going to beat Georgia because Georgia's probably still a better team from top to bottom. I just don't see a mental lapse in this team. They might prove me wrong, but I don't see it, Caleb.
Yeah, I don't either. I think one of the things that stood out to me was I think Josh Heupel. I think this is really his personality is kind of infecting the team in a good way in the sense of he never really seems to change his demeanor regardless of who they're playing. You know, whether it's UT Martin or Alabama, and you're seeing a lot of that because you're not seeing. I remember you talking about how, Tennessee would notoriously be tight for Florida back in the day. And I remember the Butch Jones years, they were notoriously tight for Florida because everybody was so desperate for the streak to end. And there was that 4-year run from 2014 to 2017 where Tennessee was better all 4 years they played Florida and went 1-3 against them. And you're not seeing this Tennessee team get that nervous when things go against them in big games, but you're also, they were, I mean, I did say UT Martin would come out gunning early and might keep it interesting, but the thing that really shocked me was the offense wasn't flat at all this game. They scored on the first 8 possessions. Actually, 9, because I don't really count that one at the end of the first half. And so I think that, I think they came out. You really can't say enough about that. Their mentality was perfect for this game. Now, next week, again, is another one. They got 2 ranked teams back to back. But I mean, given the way college football is shaking out, honestly, the whole season could come down to next week. Forget Georgia, because there's a really good chance that they beat Kentucky next week. 11-1 is on the table, and if 11-1 is on the table, a college football playoff is on the table.
You're right. Daniel saying the backups and use the yeesh emoji. Go ahead and, if you can, Daniel, tell me which backups you're talking about. So, as far as the backups that I saw, I think there still is a drop off in talent in this program. Now, that can be addressed pretty quickly, but and especially in an off season too, where Tennessee probably took a reach on some 3-star guys in the off season, and they could become much better players. We've seen Tennessee's player development it's been the best that I've ever seen, quite frankly. Daniel said the offensive production in general. You do have to remember this Tennessee football team is without Cedric Tillman, which is your one receiver. And when I say one receiver, I mean the receiver that dictates coverage. So Jalen Hyatt's coming out of the slot a lot. I don't know that he dictates coverage, Caleb, but I think what you're finding is that because a lot of times Brew McCoy has dictated coverage, Jalen Hyatt has come open. So, the offensive production in general, Daniel, I'm not sure. I think the offensive production's pretty good, but again, we're judging on some sort of weird curve with UT Martin. So all's kind of yeah, and the beauty is in the eye of the beholder in these sorts of games, Caleb.
I agree. I agree. It's hard to judge, but I really don't. I mean, a lot of the second team, I didn't really have much of a problem with. I thought Joe Milton made quite a few nice throws as the backup quarterback. Jimmy Holiday made some nice play, made a nice catch. Walker Merrill had one. Squirrel White went over 100 yards on the game. The skill players are fine. I mean, I guess I would agree that there is still a big issue with backups, I guess, when you get onto the line of scrimmage, probably, and in the secondary, but there's issues with the starters in the secondary. I mean, people have to remember where this Tennessee team was. They aren't a fully complete team right now, given everything Heupel inherited. And there was no way to fix that in one season, even with the transfer portal. And you can talk about the transfer portal and how that's changing the sport, but Dave, you know this with recruiting more than anything. Like, how often do coaches freak out about a 5-star being a bust? Because that really sets you back. You got a scholarship guy who's on for 4 years. Well, when you go in the transfer portal, you're kind of dealing with the same thing. You may get 3 or 4 guys that you think can compete, and you have to, and they're there to fill needs, and you just have to pray that they're going to work out. And you really don't know. There's still the human element. And it's a lot harder when you're doing that than when you're just loading up on talent on the recruiting trail.
You're right. And your thoughts on Kentucky having a week off? Will Levis has been a little bit banged up, a quarterback, but this is a physical football team. I think you can say that, hey, I'd bet my mortgage that Tennessee wins every single game left on their schedule except for Georgia, and I would include Kentucky in that. Kentucky is a team that if they show up and play an A+ game and Tennessee plays a B+ game, Kentucky can win that football game. Now, I don't think Kentucky's very good, but they're third in the SEC against the pass, so can they slow Tennessee down somewhat? Yes, they have a bye week to prepare, so I don't think Kentucky's just going to be the rollover and beat the Wildcats silly. Maybe it will with this team. Who knows? But I think that is at least a challenge, to say the least.
I totally agree. I think let's not forget the Jeremy Pruitt era came undone because of a game against Kentucky 3 or 2 years ago. The Vols were 2-1, still in the top 25 after a loss to Georgia. It was the COVID year. And against Kentucky in the first half, I think they had 4 turnovers, something crazy like that. Jared Garantano had back-to-back pick sixes. And I mean, that's what Kentucky does under Mark Stoops. And I've been a fan of the way Mark Stoops runs that program, because in an era where schools that aren't Alabama or Georgia have been trying to go the offensive route and find the offensive genius to build a very solid program, here's little old Kentucky stuck in the brutal SEC going the exact opposite route with the defensive coordinator and Mark Stoops, who is doing as well at Kentucky as any coach in my lifetime, better as well since Bear Bryant.
I can make a pretty strong argument that Tennessee would be just as well off if Mark Stoops gets another job as if Nick Saban retires, because to have that patsy on your schedule always got Tennessee healthier. And it really benefited. And I think that Nick Saban's lost a little bit of his edge. Daniel said that trick pass was a bit much, in my opinion. Just why? What did you think of the trick pass?
I actually wasn't a fan of it because I thought they might need that for Georgia. And so
well, but I'm of the opposite mindset, and I will tell you that I am in the minority, and Caleb, I'll admit it. I think you throw it all out there and let everybody see it, so they have to prepare for everything. I'm the exact opposite. I do not believe in holding stuff back.
But do you really think Georgia's going to start preparing for that? Like, that's the only thing like, they're still probably going to, like, it's one of those things where, like, okay, Georgia's still going to focus on specifically Tennessee's offense, and they're going to just be like, okay, if they get us on one trick play, they get us. But now they know it might happen, so I don't think there's much preparing. It's just, hey, if they throw a backwards pass to Princeton Fant, don't bite, defensive back. And
by the way, how much do they love Princeton Fant now? He's playing fullback. He's part of the passing game. He's doing all his stuff, and that guy. I happen to be a pretty big fan of after watching his press conference during the week. He comes out and he says, before I take any questions, I want to thank God, because without him, I wouldn't be here. I just thought that was incredibly strong to be a young man and to say that. And you can tell they really like Princeton Fant, who is a specimen of an athlete. He truly is.
Yeah, the funny thing about Princeton Fan, I actually listened to I guess Alabama's version of Vol Calls on Wednesday, and Nick Saban basically admitted, he said when they got in the I formation last week and had Princeton Fan, he talked about the changing of the game. He said we had players who had never known what an I formation looked like. They had no idea that they had never seen that in their life. And that's so funny on just how much the game of college football has changed, because I still distinctly remember, Dave, your prime years covering Tennessee football was mostly when Tennessee operated out of the I. And I think that and then so they do it twice in this game. Fan is effectively, this kind of builds into what we talk about with Josh Heupel, that despite the way he spreads the field, despite how he operates out of the shotgun, at heart, he still runs a lot of traditional elements. He runs as much as he passes. He uses a fullback. I mean, and Fan, you're right, is the perfect type of player for it. He's almost reminding me of, dare I invoke the name Sean Bryson?
Ah, interesting comparison. And by the way, I'm just now getting into my prime, Caleb. But
I was talking about your prime covering your peak covering the Vols. Sorry.
Right. Yeah. So no, that's just beginning. But I could see that. I was wondering if there would be a Sean Bryson type at the beginning of the season, and I guess there really has been. It's been kind of the guys that we thought. The other guy that I think you have to give a major tip to the cap to is Ramel Keaton. We talk a lot about how Jalen Hyatt's matured and got humbled and thought he'd be the man last year, and he's grown and all that, and that's all true and very, very good. But here is Keaton, who's just kind of, waiting for his opportunities. But every time he gets one, with the exception of one that he didn't run through a pass, it was a couple weeks ago. I think that was it Alabama. Yeah, it was Alabama. Yeah. It was on that little, I believe it was a 6 route. But other than that, he is, he's there when Tennessee needs him. And if that's your 1, 2, 3, 4, fourth best option with Tillman healthy, that receiver, that's pretty good, Caleb. That shows you where this team is.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I would say if there's a player, in terms of player profile, Ramel Keaton is probably the closest to Cedric Tillman in terms of how they play, because he's a physical enough receiver, has good hands, runs the right routes. I think Brew McCoy is more of Brew McCoy just physically overwhelms defensive backs. I think that's, his size is just, I don't even think he has to be that great of a route runner. Honestly, it's just, he's just so imposing. And then Jalen Hyatt is obviously the speedster that just beats guys, particularly with Heupel's offense, where, I mean, it's funny. I was talking with my brother yesterday, and I'm like, I've never seen a guy. I think one of the reasons Hyatt's so successful is, has there ever been a coach use split sets and the sideline at the same time, like have receivers that far out using a split set, back to back, or trips, I guess is what you call it. I can't think of one.
No, I can't either. I can't think of one at all. This just actually posted by Eric Kane, not a lengthy midfield handshake between the two coaches, and is perhaps UT Martin's coach upset that he got hammered? I mean, that's one of these type of games, and I'll give you what you said about Alabama. That is not as big of a victory if there is a college football playoff of 12 teams, which there will be. But by the same token, are we not better off if Tennessee's playing a better opponent this week as fans of the sport? These type of games, it's gotten to the point between the haves and the have-nots. And if you didn't happen to see the 60 Minutes on Deion Sanders, you can see what a difference in facilities there are. And I'm not comparing UT Martin to Jackson State, but I will say this. There is just such a difference in talent. It is pretty close to a major league team playing a AAA team. And to me, that's something that I think and have thought has been wrong with the sport. It's one of the reasons I like that Nick Saban scheduled a pretty tough opponent at the beginning of the year. But anyway, I don't know how
my response.
Everybody happy there. I don't know.
My response to that would be, and this is the question. I mean, because, Jason Simpson did say earlier this week that these FCS schools, they need these games for the money to keep their football program going. They have to play them. And I would guess my response, particularly with over the past 10 years, FBS has expanded so much. I think it was like 100 teams at the turn of the century, and now we're at 131, and some of the biggest teams that had followings have moved into FBS. I just wonder, you want the football programs at these smaller schools to survive. I mean, they're not the same number of kids going to the NFL, but there's a lot of kids that want to play college football. And don't you kind of need the FCS games for that? Or the FCS games for that to keep those schools afloat?
This is going to sound hardcore, but good luck to you. I mean, I understand. Yes, you do need them, and Amanda's brought up that point. And we're on with you weekdays at 8:30 Monday through Friday Eastern time. Please like, subscribe, and share.
Hardcore capitalist, Dave. Though only the weak fail.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to sound like that, but I'll give you, for instance, my son was at work today and somebody said, yeah, I'm going to the UT game, and said, but not the UT game you think of. I'm going to the UT Chattanooga game because they're top 10 in the FCS and all this. And that's well and good if you want to support them and that's your team and that's where you went. But there's just always going to be a glass ceiling. I mean, who has broken through that? I mean, ever.
The glass. I mean, no, you're right. There is
in that FCS team.
But I think they play with the understanding that there's a glass ceiling, though, is where I would come in. I think they're fine with that, knowing that they'll be good for their level. I mean, I know it's not the same as college basketball, where you got all these small schools that make March Madness, and their championship is making March Madness, and then when they get there, it's icing on the cake if they can make a run, to the Sweet 16 or whatever. But I don't know. I'm fine keeping them separate and just having one game between them. I don't know how, I'm not sure I don't think it's that much of a problem that they do that. I think it's fine.
J-Man James said, man, Hendon was on fire. He was, but he wasn't. I thought there was an underthrown pass that Jalen Hyatt reeled in. There was another underthrown pass on another fly route. I was a little surprised that there were a couple of underthrown balls. I don't know if there was the ball.
Yeah, Squirrel White should have had 2 touchdowns. He missed Squirrel White was wide open on one of the touchdowns.
Yeah, and the other one was I think it was the very first completion with Jalen Hyatt that was underthrown. So I don't know if there was some slippage or something. It kind of looked like the ball came out of his hands, but he righted it. And then, yes, he was on fire, and he breaks a record for most consecutive passes with a touchdown pass, most consecutive games with a touchdown
pass. Yeah.
Pretty phenomenal if you look over the history of what Tennessee has been able to do. And then J-Man James on Facebook also says Cedric needs to heal up to be ready for the game. And I assume you're referring to Kentucky or Georgia. I think based off every indication that I've gotten, he probably could have played today if today was Georgia, but it obviously wasn't. I think he'll be available for Kentucky, and I think he'll be available for Georgia. I don't have much doubt about that. You?
Nope. I think he's more than ready to go. The only real question is, again, how rusty will he be? Because, I mean, again, I know you think I'm crazy, but I've never been the fullest believer in saving somebody if they're banged up for the game you need them the most. I do think they need to get hit a couple of times just to get used to it. I still look. The Titans saved Derrick Henry until the postseason last year, and it didn't. Because they wanted to keep him fully healthy. I'm like, maybe Derrick Henry should have gotten a carry or 2 in that last game. And
I think it depends on the position. I think I don't. To me, you don't need a thoroughbred like Cedric Wilson out there running around when he doesn't have to. Derrick Henry, I think that being a running back position, yes, you would like for him to be aware of the contact. But, it probably also depends on the player too, Caleb.
That's true too. You're right.
I mean, there are probably some players who run out there and they're like, fresh, I'm ready to roll. But there are probably other players as well that like to get a hit. And you would think all the offensive and defensive linemen would like to take a hit or 2 before they go out there in a big game.
I mean, and even don't forget Peyton Manning too. Quarterbacks, drop back passers like Peyton Manning and Tom Brady lived their whole lives trying to not be hit. Peyton Manning got rid of the ball quickly, but even he said, coming back from neck surgery in 2012, I need to play preseason because I've got to get hit. I've got to get the feeling of getting hit before the season starts.
Yep.
And so, we'll kind of see how that goes. But again, maybe Kentucky is that game. Look, given the way Tennessee's playing, if they do what they should do, they may, I almost said Cedric Wilson, dating myself.
I think I
Cedric,
said Cedric Wilson earlier. Cedric Tillman.
yes. Cedric Tillman, next week might be the test game where you could let him get hit a couple of times, because I don't know if he's going to be necessary to beat Kentucky. I think Will Levis is a great, if Tennessee comes out the way they should, if they play the way they should, Will Levis, it's going to come down to their pass rush, because Will Levis will torch their secondary. But Kentucky's got an awful offensive line, and Tennessee has a pass rush that hasn't been consistent this year, but when it's on, it's as good as any pass rush in college football.
Good stuff. He's Caleb Calhoun. I'm Dave Hooker with you each and every weekday at 8:30 Eastern. Go to our YouTube channel, like, subscribe, and share. We would greatly appreciate that so we can bring you more content on a regular basis. For Caleb Calhoun, I'm Dave Hooker.